intricate, careful depictions of modern life have won him accolades in the US and the UK, as well as Angoulême's International Comics Festival Grand Prize in 2021. Chris Ware takes an architectural approach to his graphic novels, creating worlds using words and pictures, microcosms which are now on display in Paris. Chris Ware, hello, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're here in the Pompidou Centre, or Beaubourg, as Parisians call it, and I believe this is a bit of a special building for you. Can you explain why?
It's the first modern building I ever was made aware of in a French textbook when I was around maybe 12 years old or so. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before, and I thought, wow, Paris must be an amazing place. And that's about where my 12-year-old brain cut off or so. So that now to suddenly, and I've been here, needless to say, since then, but now to suddenly have a show here 40 years later or so is quite something. So it's, I couldn't imagine actually a more appropriate building to show comic strip artwork, because it's such a mechanical sort of medium, and a medium that kind of shows itself from the inside out. It's kind of the perfect building for that.
Now, your work is being shown here in a library, a public library, not a gallery, quite a literary choice. Can you tell us a bit more about your relationship with books, literature? What books have left their mark on you?
Pretty much every book, whether it's a book I like or don't like, has some effect. But I do love books, I think, more than anything. I much prefer going to bookstores than I do going to museums. I much prefer finding books and bringing them home than I do going to see art in museums. The first thing I did when I came to Paris was blearily walk down to the Seine booksellers and buy some old 19th century newspapers. I think I'm probably the only person that buys those things. I think those guys just hang them up just for me. A book is something that you can hold and keep for yourself. It's a very intimate experience. It's a solitary exchange between the reader and the writer in a way that is very personal and human to me. And I try to write books that somehow play on that experience, that I know that somebody by themselves is going to be reading the book, and I try to make it the best I possibly can in the most intimate and empathetic experience that I can.
Here in France, cartoons, comics, graphic novels are known as the ninth art. They have a very high-profile festival in Angoulême where you won the Grand Prix in 2021. Bande dessinée authors or artists are legitimate celebrities. It's very visible in the cultural landscape.
Okay.
But in the US, it's perhaps not so mainstream.
That's a very big understatement, yes.
And recently, we got a chance to speak to graphic novelist Alison Bechdel about her adoption of the form. Here's more from her.
In some ways, I think I became a cartoonist because I thought it would be a way to avoid scrutiny. Like, I didn't want to be a literary writer or a fine artist seemed too difficult. Like, certainly as a young lesbian in the 1980s, I couldn't have competed and written about my own life, you know. Because it wasn't taken seriously, it felt like a free play zone for me where I could express myself fully because I wasn't risking anything.
What about you? Why did you choose to embrace this medium specifically?
Well, first, I really like what Alison said about it, because there is a certain amount of invisibility to comics. And one of the things that I like about it especially is, as I've said many times, if you go into a museum and you don't understand a painting, you're very apt to blame your own ignorance of art history or of art. But if you read a comic strip or a comic book and you don't understand it or you don't like it, you just think the cartoonist is an idiot, which is a very honest relationship to have with an artist. And I very much like that, because there's no fog of theory or fashion or royalty necessarily to any of it. We're just normal people telling stories in the most clear, honest way that we can. But as far as becoming a cartoonist, I kind of sadly always wanted to be a cartoonist ever since I was a little kid and was reading Peanuts paperbacks in my grandparents' basement. I loved those books so much, and the characters felt like real people to me, so much so that I felt so sorry for Charlie Brown that I sent him a Valentine one year because he broke my heart. So I wanted to try to tell stories that had human emotion and human feeling to them.
Now, you've illustrated the cover of the New Yorker magazine many, many times, but one very striking image came from early in the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, in March 2020, where you did an illustration of a doctor wearing scrubs, speaking to what looks like her family through a tiny screen on her phone. At that strange time, when I think none of us knew what was really going on, what did you think it was most important to illustrate, most urgent to illustrate there?
I thought it was most important to draw a picture that was human and that was about the humanity, and the people who were experiencing it most directly were doctors. And I didn't want to make it something that would be that would make it seem as if it was heroic, because then it would just be easily dismissible and sort of empty. It had to be about what it was like to be a person experiencing that as a doctor. And my daughter actually suggested, she said, don't forget that doctors have families. Because one of her friends, mom and dad were both doctors, and they were terrified of going into work. I kind of feel like that's not just art's role, that's just the human role, is to try to understand what other people go through and to try to, in some way, maybe feel it, because that's what you kind of want to know. You want to ask other people, did you feel what I felt? Did you feel the same thing? And even people who are no longer alive, that's what I want to find out when I read books, is what was it like to be alive then? Did you feel the same things that I'm feeling?
One of your earliest fans, and I believe a good friend of yours, is Art Spiegelman, the creator of the Mouse books, which tackle his father's experience of the Holocaust in Poland. Now, that series of books was recently more or less banned by the Tennessee School Board.
Right.
What do you think that case has to say about the state of these so-called culture wars in the United States right now?
I think it says that people are very afraid of each other, and that they are looking for some way of pounding a tent pole into the ground in a way that they can somehow feel certain of their lives because they feel threatened. And I think that was a decision born, frankly, out of an extraordinary amount of ignorance on the part of the parents, because their response was purely to a couple of panels which supposedly were nude images, but they were images of Art's mother who had killed herself in a bathtub, which is hardly considered something that I think is censorable. So it was sort of an arbitrary decision on the part of the school board, but in a way they did everybody a really big favor by highlighting the fact that books that are human and have something to say that's incredibly important and dire about life need to be preserved. So, in the same way that the Republican Party seemed to think they were doing everybody a favor of reversing Roe versus Wade and putting a half century's worth of effort into it, sort of blew up in their faces when they realized that people actually have brains and they are worthy of respect, and rather than being patronized.
Now, I believe you put quite a bit of autobiographical detail into one of your most celebrated characters, Jimmy Corrigan. But if you had to be another character in anyone else's graphic novel, who would you choose to draw your likeness?
I wouldn't want to be anybody. I wouldn't want to put anybody else through that, I don't think. So, I mean, all the characters I draw are in some way sort of something of myself. The point of drawing comics is to try to understand. You start out by trying to understand yourself, and then you try to understand other people. So I'm always trying to get farther beyond myself, but at the same time, that won't work unless you are choosing people that you think you can kind of understand. And you have to understand your limits. It's very much sort of a personal thing. And drawing, say, Joanne Cole, who's an African-American school teacher, and Rusty Brown, I was rather nervous about, but I thought, my wife is a school teacher. I think I can try to understand or respect the character enough to try to do it and hope that it's right. And Zadie Smith has said, you try it, and if it doesn't work, you're going to know. But you won't know unless you try. You can only just tell. So I had to kind of trust her advice in that regard. So,
Chris Ware, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's a great honor.